Chapter 6. Fox and Hound, Monsters, Darkness presents itself. The long dirt road stretched through the prosperous little town tucked in the middle of a large, expansive field. The road ran through the centre of town, winding its way past toward the great forest that lay on the borders of the eastern mountains beyond. It was an ideal location for a business town, as many of the traders travelling to and from the arduous mountain pass would stop to shop their wares with the locals before making their way to the coast. There were many buildings of trade that took up the major part of the town's congested hub, even more of which were strung out along the road toward the thinning edges of town. Numerous houses stood in rows behind the buildings, but were kept out of sight from the bustle of the main road. Anyone who was passing through would have been of the opinion that this was, indeed, the perfect little town, which suited the inhabitants, for nothing else was comparable to them. The warm summer day beamed out to all of the people on their way to their respective places of interest. It was a busy day in Solstice. It was Sunday, a day for church, a day for shopping, a day for relaxing from the week of hard labour, and a day for children to play as well. A small girl weaved her way along the side of the road through town, trying not to bump into anyone on her way back home. She had been spending most of the day out in the fields that overlooked the town of Solstice. It was not anything like the village her family lived in before they moved here, the quiet little seaside harbour town where she was born. There were no fog banks strolling in with the morning tide, and no fresh fish or seafood to look forward to from the local stores. There, the little girl would play along the shores of the beach and watch the fishing boats sail in from their long day out on the sea. Or, on occasion, she would stroll along one of the many freshwater streams, following the salmon as they struggled their way upstream. There was no need to fear any of the people there in the village. Everyone knew everybody else. They were always so happy to see her, which was something the little girl dearly missed. Upon moving, she immediately learned the difference between that wonderful small village and a larger business town like Solstice. The town was a luxury at first. All the shops and places of business that the larger folks frequented would pique the girl's curiosity. That was until the shopkeepers tried to shoo her away, not wanting any unsupervised children near their wares. There were not many places for children to go in town. The streets were more dangerous for smaller folk than anywhere else. None of the adults minded their way. They were always in a hurry, never showing any courteousness to those who could not keep up with the crowds. Therefore, in an attempt to stay out of their way, the little girl took to the fields outside of town. It was peaceful there. No one was around, the air was fresher, and the sunlight was a little brighter there as well. She would find herself wandering through the tall grasses, admiring the small creatures bouncing around their domain. Every so often, she would play along the small brook that ran through the thin patch of trees, exiting from the forest beyond. There did not appear to be many other children who ventured out to play in the fields, and being a new arrival in town, she would not have known any of them. But she knew that would change as the school season would be starting at the end of the summer. Soon, they would be learning about the adult world and preparing for the times ahead. Her anxieties of a new school would build up to where she would have to go find herself amid the fields and trees. She left home as often as she could, trying hard to be an 8-year-old girl for just a little while longer.
"Out of the way, runt!"
shouted a voice that startled the little girl, as she had almost run into a man who was in a hurry to the trade store. Strands of golden locks fell over her eyes, making her venture back through town even more challenging. The little girl dodged the man as she went out of her way to protect the special item she had brought back with her. She glanced down at the small rose she had picked for her mother, who was ill and resting back home. The little girl took great pride in spending most of her time away, picking the best one she could find among the many bushes just outside of town. It made her happy just thinking how much her mother would love the special little gift. The girl weaved around the many people who paid no attention to one of her height. It bothered her to think about how far she had to go to reach her place of serenity. For some reason, her father had set up shop on the side of town closest to the larger forest, heading toward the mountains. Her parents had made it clear to warn her of all the dangerous monsters that lurked in the woods, and that no children were to venture out in that area. It did not take much to scare the little girl away from something like that, but her curiosity would run wild on occasion every time she would look out her bedroom window. Even at night, she would peek out at the forest just to see if something would appear. But nothing had presented itself as of yet, leaving her to wonder what kind of monsters were truly out there. A noise caught her attention, bringing her thoughts back to where she was. Just up ahead, a large horse shrilled and stamped in defiance. The girl jumped from the alarming sounds. There was a crowd of people standing around the disturbed animal, blocking her path through town. Glancing about, the girl quickly changed her course down a side path. Just past the butcher's shop and before the general store lay a small, narrow alley between the large buildings. The little girl fled down the path away from the ruckus in the street. Her footsteps slowed as she realized where she was. Her conscience began playing over and over the many times her father had told her never to walk behind the buildings where the older dwellings were. "Those are the slums, where the poor folk live," he would say. "They don't care much for those who make more of themselves than others." She had taken the alley's path on occasion, cutting the time it took to get back home considerably compared to the busy street behind her. But it still brought the butterflies to her stomach, the ones her mother would tell her about when children get scared. Yet, given her predicament and what she carried with her, the little girl decided to continue, despite her father's warning. The dreary scene unfolded before her as caution guided her every step. Large shadows loomed over everything, casting an eerie glow along the run-down houses now rising before her. Everything was pale, lifeless, and darker than it was on the main street. The girl kept quiet, hoping that no one would notice her. The feelings of oppression and anxiety began running through her small body with each step. For some reason, this time felt different. Something in the air was giving her reason to be very afraid of what she had come upon. Then she heard it. It was a sound that she could not comprehend right away. She stopped and tilted her head over to listen. It was the sound of sobbing. The little blonde girl peered over to the far house on the left, where another little girl was sitting upon some old rotted steps. Her head was buried deep in her lap. The bronzed hair upon her head fell over her face, shutting out the world that surrounded her small existence. The little blonde girl hesitated for a moment as she began to understand what she was hearing. The girl was crying, but it wasn't a cry the blonde girl was used to. It was the sound of pain and suffering. Yet without hesitation, she walked over to the bronze-haired girl, who did not seem to notice her approach. "Hello," said the little blonde girl from the middle of the dirty walk path. The sad girl looked up, her tear-stained eyes staring back, admonishing her horror. Without word or warning, she darted for a large hole at the side of the steps as she disappeared from sight. The little blonde girl's heart leapt with sorrow, not realizing the sudden reaction. She walked over to the hollow, squatted down, and peered through it. A pair of green eyes stared back at her, full of fear, waiting, hoping she would go away. The little blonde girl got on her knees for a better look. The hollow was filled with junk and debris, leaving little space for the bronze-haired girl to sit. She appeared to be the same age, though it was hard to tell. Her hair and body matted with muddied filth. The tattered rags she wore did little to comfort anyone, let alone someone from this miserable place. "Hi," said the little blonde girl once again. The bronze-haired girl sniffed a few times, not knowing how to trust someone with kindness in their eyes. The blonde girl was concerned for her, She just could not figure out why. "Hi," replied the bronze-haired girl. "My name is Brianna," the blonde girl announced softly. "What's your name?" The girl stared at Brianna, thinking for a few seconds before replying. "Uriah," she replied. Her voice was also soft and quiet, as to not make too much noise. Brianna smiled, thankful that she was at least willing to tell her that much. She peered around at the hole once again, contemplating their situation. "You want to come out here? I don't think we can both fit in there very well." Uriah glanced at her immediate surroundings. It was her safety spot, the place they could not reach her. She thought back, trying to recall the first time she had started coming down here. It was so long ago, but it was also much bigger to her back then as well. Brianna was right, for soon, not even Uriah would be able to fit in the small hole alone. Uriah hesitated, and then like a wounded creature crawled back out into the world. She peeked around, making sure no one else was about, before walking back over to the steps. Uriah sat down in the spot she had occupied a minute ago. Brianna started to sit next to her, but Uriah put her hands up. "No!" she strained. Brianna stopped. "What's wrong?" Uriah shook her head, her eyes looking over the cleanliness of Brianna's light brown dress. "You'll get your clothes dirty," she warned her. Brianna grinned. She sat down next to Uriah, not thinking twice about the dirt and grime. "It's okay, I don't mind," she told her. Uriah eyed her. She was not used to any of the clean folk being nice to her or getting dirty themselves. Uriah always dreaded going out of her element, seeing those who cast foul, disgusted glances her way. No one took kindly to those who lived behind the buildings, even if she was only a child. The dull pain of remembrance began to match her physical pain. Uriah rubbed her left shoulder, wincing a few times before Brianna noticed. There, just visible amid the dirt on her skin, was a large purplish mark. Brianna gasped. "Oh, did you hurt yourself?" Uriah stopped rubbing her arm. Her hand went straight for her long, stringy hair, which she began to push off to the side. "No," she replied. "I didn't." Brianna watched Uriah stiffen up as she observed the rest of her gangly little body. She began to see more bruises and cuts along her arms and legs. One even looked like a partial imprint of a hand. Then, Brianna realized, Uriah did not do any of those herself. A small ache began to replace the butterflies in her stomach. Never in a lifetime could she fathom the thoughts of why or how someone could hurt a child. It was something that never crossed her mind. As far as she was concerned, punishment was for those whom led terrible, wicked lives. Brianna could tell that Uriah was not one of them. Brianna turned her attention back to her flower. It was getting later in the day. Her parents would start to worry about her soon. The sudden joy of bringing something special home to her mother did not resurrect the good feeling she had earlier. Her eyes blurred for a second, but then flashed away with a blink as a thought occurred to her. She turned to Uriah, noticing that she too was admiring the rose. Uriah had never seen one that bright and beautiful before. The vibrant red colouring stood out amid the gloomy greys and browns that covered the forsaken environment. Brianna handed the rose to Uriah. "Here, take it," she said. Uriah looked at the rose in shock. No one had ever given her anything so wonderful before, let alone a flower. Reaching out with a shaky hand, she took it, holding it gently, admiring its form and glory. "Thank you," she breathed, still unable to feel herself while she held the treasure before her eyes. "I just need you to make one promise to me," said Brianna, cheerful by what she had just done. Uriah turned to her, not knowing what to think. "What is it?" Brianna looked at the rose. "You and I can be friends now," she replied. Uriah nodded. It did not sink into her right away, the consequences of the two of them being friends. She just accepted it as she accepted the flower. "All right," she replied, a hint of emotion fluttering in her words. Her fingers traced the soft texture of the petal's edges, each sensation sending waves of pleasure to her heart. Nothing in her life had ever been so beautiful, so pure. She had no idea of what to do with it, except to hold it and admire it. "I don't suppose you want to walk with me back home?" asked Brianna. Uriah stared at her, her small body flinching at the proposal. Her eyes grew wide as she turned back to the battered doorway behind her. "I can't," she replied. "He'll be waking up soon." Brianna looked back to the doorway as well. A loud crack and a grumbling noise came from beyond the door, scaring Brianna so much she stood up and took a step back.
Damn it, girl, where are you?
Yelled a voice from within the house. Uriah's chest began to quiver as she turned to Brianna.
You better leave,
she warned, her voice stricken with terror. Brianna took a few more steps back. A paralysing fear crept inside of her as only instinct kept her feet moving. Hurrying over to the side of the house, Brianna clutched the corner as she watched the front door open. A large hand reached out, grabbing Uriah by the hair. There was a small yelp before she disappeared inside the house.
Just what the hell do you think you're doing?
Yelled the voice. There was a loud smack and a cry. Brianna shook in her place, witnessing a cruelty she had never seen before. Her body began to tremble as tears ran down the sides of her cheeks. She was frozen, unable to move. Her lungs were empty, leaving them to gasp for air like a fish out of water. The dreadful sounds in the house continued as furniture crashed forcefully into walls. There were more hits to a small body, followed by more muffled cries. Brianna's heart cramped so much she thought she would die right there on the spot. And before she could cry out in agony herself, there was nothing. All became quiet once more. A few seconds later, the front door slammed shut. Then, all was still. Brianna's nerves were shaken. The thoughts of anything good in life were now long gone. All that was left within her was the echo of someone being beaten. Moistness began to enter through trembling lips. The taste of tears made her stomach quiver so much that she was sure to be sick there amid the filth of the slums. A few seconds went by as the feeling slowly passed. She wiped her eyes with her sleeves as the anxieties of the event began to wane. They left her as quickly as they came, sucked back into the environment that housed such horrors. The rush of the moment was gone, just enough for her to move. She looked around the evil surroundings, her confused mind trying to piece together what to do. Her attention turned to the front stairs. There, on the top step, was the rose she had given Uriah. She must have dropped it before being taken inside. Brianna's body shuddered as her feet began to move, slowly, one in front of the other. With each step she took, the terror within her soul began to rise once again. She had to reach the flower. What drove her to do what she did, Brianna would never know. All she knew is what had to be done. A few more steps led her back to the front of the house. She peered up toward the window, seeing if there was any sign of her friend. All was dark. All was quiet. Brianna reached out a trembling hand and plucked the rose from its resting place. Her mind now raced with thoughts of what to do. She had to leave. She had to put this miserable place behind her once and for all. Forever would she follow her father's advice and never wander through the back alleys of town again. But she still had one last thing to do. Brianna ran over to the hole at the side of the stairs. She peered into it, hoping Uriah had escaped and found her way back here. It was empty. Glancing around to making sure no one was watching, Brianna dropped the rose into the hole and ran back up the alley just as fast as she could. Along the way, her imagination began to possess her senses, filling in the parts she could not understand. A young girl was being held captive and tortured by an evil monster. But it was not like any monster that she had ever imagined before, and that frightened Brianna more than anything. Uriah opened her eyes. "Where am I?" she thought, glancing around the darkened room. Her mind returned to the present, the dreams of the past escaping her thoughts. "Must have nodded off," she told herself, shaking off the sleepy cobwebs. She was sitting in a corner of the viewing chamber, waiting, but for what she did not know. She had never seen or heard of a merger before, and since Brianna was chosen to perform the task, Uriah had been a little curious about what was supposed to happen. It appeared to be a rather big deal, at least to the others who reacted to the topic. "A grand design of epic proportions that will solidify the bounds of existence," someone told her upon asking. It was a bit silly to her, for how can one small angel take charge and accomplish such an ostentatious mission? Why didn't the older, stronger ones tackle this project? It wasn't as if she thought Brianna would fail. She just had a hard time seeing her succeed alone. No one else had come to help, or even bother to check on her. Uriah frowned as a small sense of foolishness fell over her, knowing that her limited knowledge could never be enough to help. But it did give her a small amount of satisfaction that being here got her out of performing some other ridiculous task she wasn't very good at. Her mind danced around the pathetic idea of her delivering messages all over the realm of heaven. That did not suit her at all. She needed to be where the action was, and, for now at least, it meant being here. She stretched her arms out, raising them toward the ceiling. Small pops and groans rippled across her body, reminding her of what it used to be like sleeping on a hard floor. Gazing about, she looked at Brianna, who was still sitting at her place in front of the universal image. Uriah smiled, knowing that at least her presence here was appreciated. Pushing herself from the ground, Uriah walked over to the center of the room. "Anything happen yet?" she called out. Brianna sat still, unfazed by the question. Uriah frowned at her lack of attention. Did she fall asleep too? Uriah peered around her friend. Brianna's eyes were wide open, staring straight ahead. Uriah waved her hand in front of her face. Brianna blinked, but nothing more. "What's wrong?" Uriah asked, with a hint of worry. Brianna hesitated before drawing up a shaky hand to point. Uriah followed her aim to an area deep within the image of the universe. Uriah peered through the massive object before her body jerked back, instinct lifting her arms in defense, preparing for an attack. A pair of red eyes were staring back at them from the farthest reaches of the universe. The eyes flickered, as if a flame were burning deep within their perception. Its body was cast in shadow, as no discernible features could be seen other than the stars it appeared to block out of sight. Uriah narrowed her eyes. Her pupils were also red and full of fire. She stared intently at the demon, trying to gauge some familiarity, but the darkened shroud made it difficult to tell. "Who are you?" Uriah demanded. Brianna snapped out of her trance as she turned to her friend, and then back to the set of eyes. "Demon, state your name," shouted Uriah. The eyes glared at them with no reply. Brianna sat back in wonder, not understanding what was going on. "Is it not her?" she wearily asked. Uriah shook her head. "No, it isn't. Demon," she demanded again, "state your—" "My, aren't you strong-headed for a novice angel?" it finally replied in a low, raspy voice. Brianna's skin crawled with fright. She could count on one hand the number of times she had encountered demons in her heavenly existence, and each time scared her so. "Who are you?" growled Uriah. "Does Nivara know you are here?" All eyes turned to Uriah. Brianna stared at her in disbelief as Uriah was saying a name that she thought was forbidden in heaven.
What?
Gasped Brianna. Uriah put a hand on Brianna's shoulder. The demon's eyes flared at the foolish angels that dared to defy it. "She is busy at the moment," replied the ghostly demon. "I am here to play your little game, princess. For now, you can call me Darkness." It hissed the last of the words, following it up with a wicked cackle that frightened Brianna, yet annoyed Uriah. "I can't believe she would send a whelp of a wisp like yourself," she mocked. "Hell must be desperate if they could only send a coward such as you." A red streak of lightning flashed from the demon, striking Uriah in the chest, sending her flying back toward the entryway behind them. Brianna stood up, horrified by what had happened. She ran to the back, kneeling beside Uriah, who was lying still on the ground. Uriah's eyes opened as the anger on her face creased to the point on her brow. Propping herself up, she let out a small gasp as her chest began to throb with a dull pain. Clenching her hand over the injured area, Uriah glared at the demon. "You'll have to do better than that," she huffed in anger. The demon laughed out once more at her pitiful little gesture. "You are either very brave or very foolish, little one," it told her. "I shall enjoy playing this game with you." The flaming eyes dissipated into the blackness of space, leaving the two alone once again. Uriah sighed with relief as she looked up at Brianna. "Yeah, we'll see," she replied, trying to stand up. Brianna helped her, not knowing whether to laugh or cry from what just happened. Uriah's injury began to subside as Brianna tried to inspect it, but her hand was slapped away before she could see just how serious it was. "I've had worse," scolded Uriah. Brianna nodded, knowing not to push her too far. For as long as they have been friends, Brianna knew Uriah's tolerance for her caring. It wasn't as if she hated someone caring about her, she just did not prefer it. "This is getting serious," muttered Brianna, with worry carrying through her tone. Uriah nodded. Though still clutching her chest, Uriah felt the pain subsiding, but her mind remained focused on what may yet lay ahead of them. "Guess I pushed him a little too far," she muttered. "You were very brave," admitted Brianna. "Thank you." Uriah tried to give her a smile. "Like I'd leave you alone with that jerk," she told her. Brianna nodded, knowing that it was futile for her to take on the demon alone. She was grateful for Uriah's help, but she was also remorseful for feeling so helpless. The two walked back to the centre of the room. Brianna's eyes weakened at the thought of what she would have done alone. Her mind could not fathom what a demon like that would be capable of. Everything was starting to look much harder as her thoughts carried over to her hero, wondering if he was capable of standing against such treachery. He represented all the things Brianna could not do in life. Now she wasn't so sure anymore. Her heart began to fall as her weakness had been exploited once again.